new laws across the country would actually make it illegal for people to call the police on black people simply because they are black. A proposed ordinance, this is in Grand Rapids, Michigan, would make it a criminal misdemeanor to racially profile people of color for participating in their lives, what Jen calls living while black, and subject people behind those 911 calls to a $500 fine. And this is after 2 incidents there made the news. One, where police were actually called to a graduation party at a public park. The attendees were mostly black, and they said a noise complaint against them was really about white residents who were uncomfortable with a large gathering of black people. And then there was another incident months later in which police handcuffed 2 unarmed black 11-year-old brothers after a phone call reported a teen with a gun. In Oregon, you may remember this story, Democratic State Rep Janelle Bynum was actually going door to door in her district outside Portland to speak to constituents back in July when a resident called police on her because she looked suspicious. Now, Bynum is backing a bill that would allow victims of racially biased 911 calls about non-crimes to sue the callers in small claims court for up to $250. Bynum's proposal actually recently passed the House and a Senate committee, but in Grand Rapids and other areas, there are other areas where these laws are being proposed. Critics are raising concerns, all right? And one of those concerns is making false crime reports is already illegal in many parts of the US. Another is that although it's relatively easy for police to show up at a scene to determine that there's no crime, it's harder to decide whether the 911 caller was acting in a racist manner in making a report. I don't think it is, if we're honest.
Well, sometimes it's going to be, sometimes it's not going to be. I think that's the truth of that. I kind of like that you have some way to right this wrong. So I kind of like that door. But I do think some of the cases will be easy to, be sort of obvious, and some will not.
Yeah, I think I like the Oregon law better than I like the Michigan law. And I'd have to hear more before I made up my mind if I was in one of those legislatures, right? Because on the one hand, we all know if you're decent people, the severity of the problem, it's preposterous. There's the guys who got in the Starbucks situation where they used the bathroom and they were police were called on them. There was a Yale graduate student who was taking a nap in her dorm room. Who sneaks into a dorm room at Yale to take a nap, right? And she has a student ID card, it doesn't matter, harangued. Illegally barbecuing in a park, that's not a thing. In Michigan, this in the story that Brooke just told you about, they got a permit for their graduation party.
Right.
See, so I want people to understand, no matter what you think the right solution is, that unfortunately, African Americans in this country live almost a different life than non-African Americans.
Right.
Like I would never even imagine getting a permit for a graduation party at a park. It wouldn't even cross my mind. Why would I? Like if somebody told me that, I'd be like, don't waste your time. You don't need a permit, it's a park, right? But black folks have to go prepare ahead of time in case cops come, in case somebody calls on you, etc. Then there was a 4 businesswomen who were had the cops called on them for playing golf. I mean, what is, and then we just covered one today, the guy picking up trash in front of his own apartment building.
Yeah.
Who picks up trash in front of somebody else's apartment building? And how would that be dangerous? And then my favorite story of all time, the kid who was mowing the lawn for his neighbor. And the cops get called on that kid. Who mows somebody else's lawn? And how is that dangerous? So I understand the severity of the problem, and if you don't, you're trying not to see it. And when we explain to you the perspective of other people and you see it with your own eyes, if you reject it, it says something about you. It's saying, I don't care what other people experience. I only care about myself. And so I'm asking you to look into that. Okay, now when you get into remedies, I think the #1 remedy is training of cops, etc., because I don't want any of these folks getting hurt. The Grand Rapids, Michigan one, it's a little tough because it makes it a criminal misdemeanor. And yes, it's a fine, and $500 is a lot of money. But some people might have genuinely been calling it in because they thought it was not the lawnmower guy, not any of the ones we just mentioned, right? But there could be more borderline cases that we are not seeing, right? But the Oregon one says, hey, look, if you think it's really egregious, you can take him to small courts claim. It's not criminal. And you can win $250. And there, at least a judge would get to decide, was it egregious or was it not egregious? And it's small claims court, it doesn't take much time. So I think that's an interesting one that they should consider. That's my take on all of it.
Yeah, I just want to say 2 things because I think it's important to note that these people aren't Klan members. They're not intentionally, but they don't realize that black people scare them and that that's still the same problem, whether you have your hood on or you don't. That still negatively affects my life the exact same way. So I don't really care what your intent was. It's just the fact that a black person scared you and you actually called the police. And on the point where it's like, well, we already have these laws against false crimes. We also have a law against murder everywhere, but lawmakers all across the country are still wasting taxpayer money and time talking about infanticide.
Yeah.
So it's just, this is something that happens to matter. I don't know.
Yeah, so that's a great point, and I just want to build on what you said. A lot of times, right wingers shut down and they go, "Oh, so if I'm worried about crime in my neighborhood, now all of a sudden you think I'm KKK." No, what we're saying is you don't have to be KKK. That's not the point. The point is maybe and this doesn't just apply to right wingers, by the way. Unfortunately, the media's put this in a lot of our heads from the local news and the movies and everything else. And those stereotypes exist in the back of your head, and you might be doing harm to your fellow citizen without realizing it. And that's part of why we cover these stories. Like what you see? Click the subscribe button below, and don't forget to ring the bell to never miss another video from the Young Turks.